Okay, so today we're diving deep into a story that starts with, well, a real tragedy. The suicide of a Bengaluru techie, Atul Subhash. But it kind of spirals outward from there, doesn't it? It becomes about so much more than just one man's death. We're talking about, like, justice, gender equality, huge issues in India. And we've got all this stuff to try and make sense of it all. Articles from, like, the Indian Express, the Economic Times, NDTV, even some really in-depth legal stuff from India legal and eye pleaders.
Yeah. It's one of those cases that just grabs you, and for me, it's because it really throws light onto something we don't talk about enough, like how gender actually plays out in our legal system, all the hidden stuff.
And, like, what are the big questions we should be asking? I mean, from your perspective as an expert, what does this case say about our laws? About how they might need to, like, evolve?
Well, one of the biggest ones for me is this. Are our laws actually doing what they're supposed to? Like, are they really protecting the vulnerable, or are they kind of failing us? And is it fair, even, for everyone involved?
Right. Okay. So let's get back to basics for a sec. Can we just, like, lay out the facts of this case? Like, what happened?
Sure. So from what we're seeing in the Indian Express, Atul Suhash was found dead in his apartment December 9th. And, well, it seems like suicide.
And what led up to it? What do we know about, like, the circumstances?
Well, Atul's brother filed a complaint. And this is where things get uh, messy. He's basically accusing Atul's estranged wife, Nikita Singhania, and her family of pushing Atul to this point, driving him to suicide, saying they were harassing him, and get this, making these crazy financial demands.
Okay, hold on. How crazy are we talking? Give me some numbers.
Okay, so the complaint says they wanted 3 crore rupees, like a ton of money, to withdraw some legal cases they had against Atul. And then on top of that, they wanted another 30 lakh just so he could see his son.
Seriously. So the brother's obviously convinced that something really bad was going down here, but you said it gets messy. What do you mean by that?
It's important to remember that this is just one side of the story. We know from news reports that Nikita also filed a case, a dowry harassment case, against Atul and his family back in 2022.
So it's like a two-way street, accusations flying all over the place.
Yeah.
This is already so complicated.
It is, and it gets even more complicated when you look at it within the context of Indian law, specifically something called Section 498A of the Indian Penal Code. This part of the law deals with cruelty from, like, a husband or his relatives towards a woman.
So basically, this law is meant to protect women in marriages.
Exactly. And it pops up all the time in cases like this one. It's meant to, shield women from abuse and all that, but it's also a huge source of debate.
I knew there was a bud coming. What's the debate about?
Well, the thing about Section 498A is it's not gender neutral, which, brings up a bunch of problems, like could it be misused easily? And what about the men? What if they're the ones being harassed or abused? Do they have the same protection? Not really.
Right. That makes sense. If a woman can file a dowry harassment case, shouldn't a man have the same option if it's his wife's family who are doing the harassing?
Exactly. And that's where Atul's case gets really tricky. You see, his brother is saying that his family was harassing him. But since the law isn't gender neutral, Atul might not have had the same legal options as Nikita did when she filed her case. It's almost like the law, by trying to protect one side, is leaving the other side super vulnerable.
Man, such a tough situation. So are other countries having this same issue? Like, with this whole idea of making laws gender neutral, what are they doing?
Oh, it's a global conversation for sure. There was this article in Today News recently that ranked different countries based on, like, how gender neutral their laws are.
And where does India fit into all that?
It's complicated, right? India is in this really unique position. It's got this legacy of deep-rooted social norms, like really ingrained stuff. But at the same time, it's trying to create a legal system that's fairer, more equitable for everyone. It's a tough balance.
Right, so it's like this tug of war between tradition and reform. And Atul's case, sadly, is right in the middle of it. But I'm having trouble picturing this. Like, what does this tension actually look like in real life?
Okay, so think about this. There was this 2006 Supreme Court case, Priya Patel v. State of Madhya Pradesh. In this case, the court basically said a woman couldn't be convicted of gang rape. Why? Because the way the law was written, only men could commit that crime.
Wait, seriously? So even if a woman was guilty, they couldn't be convicted because of how the law was worded?
Yeah, crazy, right? It's like the language of the law, even if it wasn't meant to be this way, can create these outcomes that just don't feel fair at all. And this case really fueled the debate about making our criminal law clearer, more gender neutral.
Wow. That's really eye-opening. So where do we go from here? How does India actually move forward on this?
There are a few paths people are talking about. One that's been making a lot of noise is this idea of a uniform civil code. You've probably heard of it.
Oh, yeah, I have. But honestly, I don't really get it. Can you, like, break it down for me? What is it? And how would it affect this whole gender and law thing we've been talking about?
Sure. So the UCC is basically this idea that we'd replace all these different religion-based personal laws with one set of rules
Hmm.
for everyone. It's a huge change, and it would impact, like, everything: marriage, divorce, inheritance, and obviously gender equality, too.
Okay. Yeah, that would be huge. So I'm guessing there are a lot of strong opinions about this.
Oh, tons. It's one of the hottest topics in India right now. People on both sides feel really strongly about it. Some people say it would bring everyone together,
Right.
create more unity, and it would be way better for gender equality. But then others are worried that it would mess with religious freedom, that it would destroy all this cultural diversity. It's a really tough one.
Sounds like we're getting into some seriously deep water here.
We are. And Atul's case, as tragic as it is like a big flashing sign. It shows us why these conversations are so important. His story reminds us that the legal system and how it's changing, those things have very real consequences for real people.
Okay. So we've got this background of, like, laws changing, people debating, and then you add this really sad story about Atul Subhash into the mix. What's next? What's the plan for the rest of our deep dive?
Well, as we go deeper into this case, it's really important to remember that it's just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. By really looking at the details of Atul's story and all the legal battles around it, we can start to understand how complicated this whole thing is. Gender, justice, building a society that's actually fair.
Right. And just to remind everyone, Atul's wife and her family, they took off, disappeared. The police are still looking for them, and Nikita's been summoned for questioning. So it's not over yet.
Definitely not. This story is still unfolding. And as the investigation goes on, we'll be keeping a close eye on things. We want to see how these legal issues play out and what they mean for the future of gender equality in India.
So we've been talking a lot about Indian law and how it's changing, right? This whole push for more gender-neutral laws. But I feel like we can't forget about Atul, about what actually happened to him. Like those financial demands his wife and her family were making. It's just awful.
It really is. It's easy to get lost in the legal stuff, all the jargon and the details. But at the end of the day, this is about real people, people's lives. And when you hear about demands like that, so much money allegedly to drop cases and let him see his own son, it leaves a bad taste in your mouth, doesn't it?
Yeah. It feels like this financial thing almost makes the whole tragedy even worse. Do you think this kind of thing happens a lot?
It's tough to say for sure how common it is, but I think it shows us something, right? It shows us that we need more transparency, more fairness, especially when it comes to money, during divorces, separations, all that.
Speaking of divorce, I was thinking about that article from the Economic Times, the one about alimony. Remember that? It was insane. That case went on for over 20 years.
Oh, yeah. I remember that one. The Supreme Court ended up ordering the husband to pay, 5 crore rupees in alimony. 5 crore. To his wife. And get this, the court even listed 8 factors to consider when deciding these things.
8 factors. Wow. That seems super thorough. What were they, like, what kind of things are they looking at?
Well, it's all kinds of stuff, like their social status, how much money each of them make, what their lifestyle was like during the marriage, did one of them give up their career for the family, all that kind of stuff.
So they're really trying to get the whole picture, huh? Hmm. But even with those guidelines, 5 crore rupees is a lot of money. How do they even decide on an amount that huge?
That's the tricky part, isn't it? Trying to figure out what's fair in these situations. It's so complicated. You got to think about how long the marriage was, what each person contributed, what they might earn in the future. There's no easy answer.
And then, when you add in all this stuff with the Tools case, right, all these allegations of harassment and, like, forcing him into things, it just makes everything so much more confusing.
Definitely. It makes you wonder if the laws we have, if they're even enough. Like, what if someone's using money to manipulate someone or even threatening them? I don't know if the system can really handle that.
It makes me think we need even more specific laws, or at least, like, clearer guidelines, especially for the financial stuff. When people are separating, getting divorced, especially if there's abuse or harassment involved.
Yeah. That's a really important point. I think it's a conversation we need to have. I mean, divorce rates are going up, societal norms are changing all the time. The legal system needs to keep up with that, you know? It needs to be able to protect people from being taken advantage of.
Totally. And even though we're talking about money here, we can't forget about the other stuff, like the emotional toll this takes on people, all the stress and the pain.
Absolutely. You're right. We focus on the legal stuff, the financial stuff, but the human side of this, it's huge. It's devastating.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it's like we're seeing this shift happening in India, right? How people think about gender roles, what they expect from each other.
For sure. And that shift, it's bleeding into these legal conversations too. Like there's more awareness now about men's rights. Some of the articles we looked at, like the one from India Legal, talked about that.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a sec. I feel like the men's rights movement, it always gets put up against the women's rights movement, like they're enemies or something. But are they really?
I don't think it's that simple. Both of these movements, they come from the same place. They want fairness, they want equality, but they just focus on different parts of the problem.
So how do we get past that, the us versus them thing? Is there a way to, like, bring these two sides together?
I think the key is understanding this. If any group is being treated unfairly, it hurts everyone. We all lose. Real equality means fixing the problems, you know, the root causes, no matter who's being affected.
That makes a lot of sense. Like, we
Yeah.
need to find that common ground, especially when we're talking about something as big as the law.
Exactly. We need laws that protect everyone, everyone's rights, everyone's dignity, no matter what their gender is. And that brings us back to this whole debate about gender-neutral laws in India.
Right. And you mentioned earlier about that ranking of countries, right? How gender neutral their laws are. Can you give me some examples of what other countries are doing? Like, what's working for them?
Sure. One that's really interesting is Belgium. They've gone all in on gender-neutral language. Like, it's the default now in their legal documents and official forms. Instead of saying he or she, they use terms that include everyone, all genders.
Wow, that's a big change. Language is so powerful, isn't it? Are there other countries doing similar things?
Oh, yeah. Like Denmark and France, they have policies now to promote gender-neutral language everywhere. Like in schools, in government stuff, even just out on the streets. It's like they're trying to change how people think about gender from the bottom up.
Makes you wonder if India could do something like that, huh?
Yeah.
Like, change the way we use language. Is that even possible here?
It's hard to say, but I think as more people become aware of this issue, as we talk about it more openly, I think it's definitely possible.
It would be amazing, wouldn't it, to show everyone that they deserve equal treatment, equal respect, no matter their gender. But wouldn't that require, like, changing a lot of laws?
Yeah, for sure. And there have been attempts, right? Like back in 2019, there was the Criminal Law Amendment Bill. They were trying to make the criminal law more gender neutral, especially for crimes that can affect anyone, not just men or women.
So what kinds of crimes are we talking about here?
Stuff like sexual harassment, stalking, voyeurism. The bill was trying to say, hey, anyone can be the victim of these crimes, and the law needs to reflect that.
So it sounds like a good idea, right? But I'm guessing it didn't go so smoothly. What happened?
It got a lot of pushback. People were against it, and it eventually just stalled. Some people said it didn't go far enough. Others were worried that it would actually make things worse for women, like it would take away some of their protections. It just shows you how hard it is to change these laws, especially when they deal with such sensitive topics.
It's like taking one step forward, then getting pulled 2 steps back.
Yeah.
But there must be some things people agree on, right?
Yeah.
Some ways to make the system better.
Well, one idea that's been gaining some traction is setting up special courts or like tribunals
Yeah.
just to deal with cases that involve gender issues.
Okay, that's interesting. So how would that work?
The idea is you'd have judges and lawyers who really know this stuff, right? They'd be experts in gender dynamics and all the nuances of these types of cases. So in theory, you'd get more consistent rulings, rulings that actually make sense.
Right, that makes sense. And what about technology? Could AI play a role in all of this? Like,
Yeah.
could it help us create a fairer legal system?
I think it could, definitely. We're already seeing some cool stuff happening in legal tech. They're using AI to analyze past cases, figure out if there's bias in how the laws are written, even help write new laws.
So AI could actually help us write better laws, fairer laws.
I think it has the potential, yeah.
Hmm.
But obviously, you got to be careful with any technology. You got to use it ethically, responsibly. It's not about replacing humans. It's about giving them better tools, helping them make better decisions.
And what about the rest of us?
Yeah.
Regular people, like the people listening to this right now. What can we do to help change things?
I think that's where it gets really exciting. We can all be part of this, not just by listening, but by actually doing something. Like, learn about the issues, talk about them with your friends and family, challenge your own biases, support organizations that are fighting for equality, contact your representatives. It all starts with each of us.
So we're not just like powerless bystanders in all this.
No, not at all. We all have a voice, and if we use our voices together, we can make a real difference.
That's pretty inspiring, actually.
Yeah, and I think that's a good place to bring it back to Atul's case. We've talked about all these big ideas, right? Gender, justice, changing the laws. But now let's refocus on the human story, the real people at the heart of all this.
You're right. Okay, so as we head into the last part of this episode, what are the key things our listeners should keep in mind?
I think the biggest one is this. Atul's story is about so much more than just his death. It's like a tiny window into all these huge issues India is facing right now. The fight for gender equality, how our legal system is changing, and how we can build a society that's truly fair for everyone.
So we've like really gone deep on this one, haven't we? We started with Atul Subhash's story, which is just heartbreaking, and then we got into all this stuff about gender equality, what needs to change in India's laws. It's a lot. But I think it's clear that we're at this point, right? Like we're stuck between these old, deep-rooted ideas about gender and this like desire for a fairer future for everyone.
It's true, and we can't forget that this isn't just some theoretical discussion, you know? These legal issues, they affect real people. Like, what happened with Atul and Nikita, their families, so many others who are going through similar stuff. It's real life.
Definitely. And earlier, we were talking about how other countries are handling this whole gender neutrality thing in their laws.
Hmm.
Were there any examples that, like, really stuck out to you, ones that maybe India could learn from?
One that I thought was really interesting was France. They've actually started promoting gender-neutral language everywhere, not just in government stuff, but in schools too, like in textbooks and stuff. It's like they're trying to teach kids to think about gender differently from a young age.
That's a cool idea. So it's not just about changing the laws, it's about changing how people think, right?
Yeah.
But do you really think that's possible in India? Like, we're so diverse, and tradition is such a big deal here.
Change is always possible, right?
Right.
But it takes a lot of effort. You need legal reforms, obviously, but you also need people to talk to each other, to educate themselves, to be willing to, like, question their own beliefs about gender roles and all that. It's a process.
Yeah. And we talked about the Uniform Civil Code too, right? The UCC. That could be a game changer for gender equality in India, but there are a lot of strong opinions about it. Can you break down the arguments for and against it, like how it relates to this whole idea of gender-neutral laws?
Sure. So people who support the UCC, they say it would create a system where everyone's treated the same, regardless of their religion, which would be huge, especially for women who often get the short end of the stick under personal laws based on religion. Like, take inheritance laws, for example. Those are all over the place, depending on your religion, and a lot of times women lose out. The UCC would fix that, they say, by making the rules the same for everyone.
That makes sense. So what about the people who are against it? What are their concerns?
Well, they're worried about religious freedom and that it would kind of wipe out all this cultural diversity we have in India. Like, they think it's important to protect the unique customs and traditions of different religious communities. And they're worried that imposing one set of laws on everyone would just cause a lot of problems and unrest.
So it's like trying to find that balance, right, between individual rights, religious freedom, and this goal of making society fairer for everyone.
Exactly. And I think this whole debate shows us something really important. Legal reform isn't about finding the right answer. It's about trying to figure out what works for everyone, you know? It's about navigating all these different values and beliefs and trying to find solutions that respect all of them.
And at the end of the day, it comes down to individuals, right? We can talk about laws and courts and AI all day, but what can regular people, like the folks listening to this, do to be a part of this change?
Well, the first step is to stay informed, right? Educate yourself about the issues, talk about them with people you know, question your own biases, and don't be afraid to hold your elected officials accountable. Like, make your voice heard. You'd be surprised how much power we have when we work together.
So it's not just about waiting for someone else to fix things, it's about taking action ourselves.
Exactly. And I think Atul's story reminds us of that. It might be a tragic story, but it also shows us that we have a responsibility to speak up, to fight for justice, and to try and build a society where everyone, regardless of gender, is treated with respect and dignity.
So we started off with this really sad story, but somehow we've ended up with a message of hope, right? Like, things can change, things can get better.
I think so, yeah. It shows how resilient people can be. And deep down, I think we all want the same thing, a world that's fair, more just for everyone.
Absolutely. And to everyone listening, we'd love to hear your thoughts. If you were in charge of rewriting India's laws, what would you do? How would you balance this idea of gender neutrality with the need to protect people who are vulnerable? It's a tough question, but it's one we all need to be thinking about as we move forward. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.